it's very, very similar to Stranger Things.
Yes.
Right. In fact,
Eerily similar.
When I talked to Free League, and I said, I really like Stranger Things, they said, well, we were first. Hello and welcome to another episode of Every Edition, the Tabletop RPG Talk Show. I'm John.
I'm Jesse.
Today we're going to loot the body and take a look at Mork Borg, coming at you from Free League Publishing.
This episode is very, very Free League heavy. In the random encounter today, we're looking at Tales from the Loop, another 80s themed game from Free League.
Yeah, but before we do that, we'll of course do a morale check, which is taking a look at the tabletop role-playing game industry and news of the day. But before we even do that, Jesse, what's new?
Well, on my stream, which we talked about last episode, and I've talked about a couple times throughout our history, I've actually added a whole day for world building.
Oh, great.
I used to do it sort of, on the fly or like sometimes the night before a session, so it kind of the best. But now I've dedicated every Wednesday to world building, and it's World Building Wednesday. And of course, I use World Anvil for that instead of a Google Doc because I'm not, a Neanderthal. For those of you who don't know, World Anvil is just like a sort of Wikipedia system for your world. I use that.
Cool.
And I sort of involve my community with it. And we have a couple hours where we just sort of powwow and create some awesome stuff.
Cool. That's excellent.
John, what's new?
Well, so I've been actually watching a lot of TV. That might not seem like a big deal to some people, but I don't feel like I get to watch that much television. But it was a good time for me to do a little bit of binge watching, and I'm up to date with Stranger Things.
Nice.
Season 4 is awesome. If you haven't seen it, please rush out and do it. I'm also really enjoying Star Trek: Strange New Worlds.
Yes.
The new series on Paramount Plus.
Is that second season?
Yeah, no, it's in its first season. Just started. But the characters, they first appeared in Star Trek Discovery.
Sure.
And so it's kind of like a Star Trek Discovery spin-off. I actually think it's going to eclipse very quickly Star Trek Discovery. It's really good. It's, I think at this point, probably the best Star Trek series in quite a while. Which maybe that's not saying much. But it's really good. As a fan of Star Trek, I'm very satisfied with Star Trek: Strange New Worlds, and again, highly recommended. Go check it out.
All right, it's time for a morale check. On our morale checks, we take a look at the new news of the RPG world and talk about everything going on in our industry. First off, Free League, as I said, this is a very Free League heavy episode, just finished their Kickstarter for Blade Runner. They've got a new Blade Runner tabletop game coming, and holy crap, it made a lot of money.
Yeah.
It made just shy of $1.7 million.
Wow.
And hit almost all of their stretch goals except for one, I think. It was just one at the very end. And most of their stretch goals were just sort of like ancillary anyway.
Yeah.
But it's insane. Like the system they use is the year zero system, so the system of dice that they use for all of their games. The one where you get to roll like a bunch of Yahtzee D6s. Yep. It's really fun. But this one is sort of set in the Blade Runner universe. You play as a Blade Runner or a bunch of other classes. I believe people who backed it, as soon as it ended, got a digital copy of the game. So there may already be people out there sort of showcasing the sort of specs of the game.
Yeah.
But it looked really nice. The artwork looked really cool. They showed a couple pages from inside the book, and it looked really nice. I'm super, super pumped.
Yeah, Jesse and I have both become, I think, pretty big Free League fans.
Oh, yeah.
And so this episode is sort of a loving salute to
yeah.
Free League. Most of their games have some kind of tweak, right, to the Year Zero engine. So something either on top of the Yahtzee D6 that you're rolling. And Blade Runner had sort of more traditional polyhedral dice thrown in there. I don't know what you do with them just yet, but it definitely had more dice than like the Alien RPG or Tales from the Loop, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. All right, so in other news, Troll Lord Games successfully kickstarted a new 5th edition adventure path called the Undying War. It's going to be a 350 plus page hardcover.
It's insane.
Levels 1 to 13. Could take your 5th edition character from level 1 to 13. And it's actually a collection of modules in their A series. And if you're not familiar with the output of Troll Lord Games, Troll Lord Games puts out a game called Castles and Crusades, which is a wonderful Rosetta Stone OSR kind of game that will allow you to play a Dungeons and Dragons game, but it's a little more rules light.
Yeah.
But actually, I called it a Rosetta Stone because it's so sort of stripped down that you can run adventures from 1st edition, 2nd edition, 3rd edition pretty freely with this system. It's a really great middle of the road system if you have a big collection of modules from lots of different editions of Dungeons and Dragons. I'm a big fan because I have a big collection. Castles and Crusades is perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect for that. But anyway, this hardcover for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons is actually a translation or a conversion of some of their oldest stuff to 5th edition. And so it includes their whole A series of modules, which has Assault on Blacktooth Ridge, which is the very first module that Troll Lord Games ever published. So this is sort of like coming full circle and updating their back catalog to 5th edition. They do put out 5th edition products in addition to putting out products for Castles and Crusades. Big Troll Lord Games fan. If you missed this Kickstarter, this hardcover is going to be out and easily available very soon. So check out Troll Lord Games and the Adventure Path, the Undying War.
Wizards of the Coast always has some new news, including anything related to Magic the Gathering, because there's always products coming for, like, every day they've got something new coming out. This time we've got Warhammer 40K crossover into Magic the Gathering. So we've had D&D crossovers. We got news that there was going to be Lord of the Rings crossovers. We got Walking Dead crossovers.
Is this even allowed? Can you do? Is the company that puts out D&D allowed to also then put out a Warhammer 40K?
Yeah,
like
I'm not sure about that. But so there's going to be 4 decks. It's not going to be like a full set like the D&D sets that we've gotten.
Right.
It's only going to be 4 decks with cards, card art, loose themes in the cards, and what they actually do, and the names are going to be very, very much Warhammer 40K. They've revealed only a couple of cards so far, but they're like, one of the cards was for the glory of the Blood King or something like that. I'm not too up on 40K, but it was very much like I saw the card and I was like, okay, that's Warhammer 40K without seeing the sort of tagline. I'm super interested to see what they do with this, because this and the Lord of the Rings stuff is sort of them testing the water with crossing over into IPs that they don't own in like a bigger space. Like clearly they don't own The Walking Dead, but they only made a couple of cards for that.
Right.
But they own D&D, so they've been doing crossovers for a while for that. So I'm curious as to what other IPs they might want to grab if this does well and if Lord of the Rings does well. So I'm super excited.
And finally, WizKids is coming out with some minis to support the Dragons of the Stormwreck Isle starter set, which is going to be the new starter set for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition coming out this summer, Target exclusive.
Yep.
But so WizKids is going to be releasing a pack of minis that are going to be some of the pre-generated characters, it looks like, in the game. And 4 of the 5 pre-generated characters look an awful lot like the characters from the 80s Dungeons & Dragons cartoon. Super exciting.
Yeah.
There's a Presto, there's an Eric, there's a Diana, and there's a Hank. There's also a 5th mini, which is clearly a cleric. That is not one of the characters from the show. But wow, if 4 of the 5 pre-gens are characters from the 80s cartoon,
that's really cool.
Like I said, that's gonna make me run out and be excited to get this. But the minis I'm more excited for those than I am the starter set. Those are just fantastic. They look great. The update to Diana's costume in particular is really excellent. So if you get a chance to take a look at that, and if you're a fan of the 80s cartoon, they did a really nice job with those minis.
I do think as a DM or somebody even potentially trying to, get into D&D with a starter set, are coming into a shop and being like, hey, how can I start playing D&D? You can either hand them the original starter set or the essentials kit, and they're just like a bunch of papers, or you hand them the starter set and the minis, and they're like, oh, I get to use these minis. They look cool. They're already painted. Like, I think especially for newer players, it's a lot easier when it's not so much theater of the mind and they have things that they can sort of move around like a board game. Yeah, so I think that's really smart.
When I first saw the announcement of WizKids having minis to support it, I couldn't tell if the minis were included in the box or if they were separate. But the box set is so cheap.
It's like $20.
I don't think there's any way that the minis are included. They must be a separate purchase.
I think so.
So don't get your hopes up, everybody. This is probably going to be an additional $20. Not
and probably Target exclusive as well.
Well, I don't know. That we'll see.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. But we'll see. Again, if they are, I guess I'll be hitting the spot. All right. So let us know what you think. Are you excited for the possibility of 80s Dungeons and Dragons cartoon minis coming out from WizKids?
Heck yeah.
Do you?
I want the DM.
Yeah. Well, oh man, that would be awesome. Or in Uni, I'd love to have Uni. But let us know. Do you collect minis? Do you include them at your gaming table? I'm really worried this summer that the Spelljammer minis are going to make me broke. So WizKids, stop it. But let us know what you think. If you collect minis, talk to us about your collection and what it is you collect. And drop a comment down below, or you can find links to all of our socials at everyeditionrpg.com. There you've got links to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and links to our podcast on Apple and Spotify. You can also send us a note at everyeditionrpg@gmail.com. And we love getting notes and letters from all of you and questions and people sending us PDFs of their games or recommendations. All that kind of stuff is super fun for us. So keep it coming. everyeditionrpg@gmail.com.
It's time for a random encounter. Today's random encounter, we are talking about Tales from the Loop and our experience with it. It's from Free League. It's a sort of 80s themed game that I really enjoyed running. We're going to break it into sort of two sections. One's, we're going to break down what comes in the starter set, talk about the various things you get in a non-spoiler way. And then in the second part, we're going to break down how I prepared for the game and how the game played as a whole. So then obviously it's going to be very spoiler heavy.
And we'll be sure to be very clear about when we're headed into spoil territory. So part one here, let's break down what's in the starter kit.
Yeah.
What's in the starter set.
Free League has yet to disappoint me in anything that they do, especially the starter sets. The starter sets are a little bit of a premium.
Yeah.
The Alien one was like almost $60 or something like that, but it came with like a bunch of dice. So this comes with dice. This comes with a really awesome like sort of cardstock map that was double-sided. It comes with the rules for the DM, and it comes for the actual adventure itself and some pre-made characters.
Yeah, the adventure is called The Recycled Boy, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But Tales from the Loop is based on the artwork of I believe a Swedish artist named Simon Stålenhag. And his artwork shows like scenes from idyllic Swedish towns with kids in the 80s running around, but also robots.
Yeah.
Right? And so the artwork's really evocative, really beautiful, really cool. It really does grab your imagination. It feels like if you look at his art, it looks like like a Steven Spielberg movie imagination, right?
Yeah.
Sort of thing. And so this was the inspiration for the role-playing game. It's also been the inspiration for an Amazon Prime series of the same name called Tales from the Loop. And the art book that the game is based on is also called Tales from the Loop. The artist is, like I said, Simon, I believe it's Stålenhag. But so Free League Publishing is also a Swedish game company.
Yep.
And it's really, like Jesse said, their stuff is really premium, it seems like. And it's almost, at this point, as fans, I'm starting to trust them.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I remember in the 80s with the original Nintendo, like a game that was put out by Konami, right? that was a stamp of approval, not like what
Now,
Konami today.
Yeah, not
right?
so much anymore.
No. I'm talking about the era of like, the original Castlevania and Life Force. And, if you saw a game was Konami, you were like, you're going to be getting a good Nintendo game, right? I'm starting to feel the same way about tabletop role-playing games and Free League.
Yes.
Our experiences have been with Alien and with Tales from the Loop. I'm getting ready to play Things from the Flood,
yes,
which is the 90s version of Tales from the Loop. I'm getting ready to play that at Origins.
Yep.
And I've looked at the Forbidden Lands, which is their fantasy role-playing game. And I've been reading that and digesting that lately, and that it also seems excellent. There's some other games too.
Yeah, there's a like a Nordic horror game.
Basin.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm.
Which, on the website there wasn't too much information, but knowing Free League's sort of track record, I have no problems just sending it off and trying to get it as soon as possible.
I feel like they're a company you can trust.
Yeah.
Like and so I would say what sets them apart from other tabletop role-playing game companies, at least with the use of their Year Zero engine, which is powering all the games that we've mentioned so far in this episode. It is, it is really focused on the role play.
Yep.
It's not a super math, crunchy numbers, rules heavy experience, right? So it's going to be, you're going to be able to get together with your friends. You're going to roll some dice, and you're probably going to roll a lot of dice.
Yeah, a lot.
Right? Like it seems to be they definitely like the quantity of dice, but you're not really, at least in these games, you're not adding. You're just looking, right, for certain numbers. You're not actually adding those numbers together. You're looking for sixes to mark out success.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're keeping track of the number of sixes. So it really lends itself as a fantastic, my first role-playing game.
Sure.
Right. And it does appeal to some people who, we've talked about this before, people who might be intimidated by 5th edition or Dungeons and Dragons in general.
Yep.
I totally can imagine that there are some people out there that don't like Dungeons and Dragons, but would really like Tales from the Loop. And so even if you have that friend who doesn't think they like role-playing games, this might be one.
Yeah.
This might be one to try. It's very different.
And all of their games have, they have different themes. Like there's the Alien one, that's obviously Alien. There's the horror one. There's the 90s theme. There's the 80s theme. So you could like pick and choose one that you think that these people might be into.
Right.
You'd be like, hey, I've got this really awesome thing for you, and they'll 100% like it. It's super easy to pick up. The rules are super basic, and like you said, John, it's very very role play focused.
Yeah, you're just looking for sixes when you roll the dice. Otherwise, it is a little bit more cooperative storytelling, and if that's the type of role playing game you prefer, then you're gonna like you're gonna like Tales from the Loop. So the basic setting for the game of Tales from the Loop is it's taking place in a small town. And there are really two locations where you can have it. You can have a small town in Sweden, or you can have a small town in the U.S. And there are actually two different maps.
Yep.
Right, for two different towns, depending on where you want to have this located. And there's some type of scientific research going on in that town that has made things kind of wonky. It's very, very similar to Stranger Things.
Yes.
Right. In fact,
eerily similar.
When I talked to Free League, and I said, I really like Stranger Things, they said, well, we were first, right? So there might be a little bit of a sticking point there, and I'm sure Tales from the Loop may have been an influence on Stranger Things.
Sure.
But there's a lot of similarities, right? Yeah.
And the artist has been doing this sort of like, if you even just Google search this artist, you might have even seen their art before, but he's known for these landscapes that are very picturesque, that have maybe a kid or two on their bike, or have some kind of like 80s themed technology, and then the juxtaposition of a big robot or these big skyscrapers, things that wouldn't traditionally be in an 80s setting. So that definitely, he's been around for couple decades now doing that. So it definitely seems like an influence for Stranger Things. Yeah. And while we were playing this, we sort of felt like we had a Stranger Things soundtrack going on.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's basically, I mean, if you really want to simplify it, it's Stranger Things with robots.
Yep.
Right, like that's there's a little bit more lore to the game. Like certain technologies were invented post World War II in the 50s and 60s that weren't actually invented in our world, and so it skewed the timeline and the development of the world. So it's in the 80s, but it's with different technology and different technological evolutions and stuff. The lore is cool. It's definitely worth worth taking a look and reading. All right, so let's get into part 2 of this exploration of Free League's Tales from the Loop, and let's get into a little bit of spoiler territory with the Recycled Boy. So we're going to talk about the adventure that comes with the starter set. It's called the Recycled Boy. If you don't want to have it spoiled for you, you can, if you're on YouTube right now, you can click down below ahead to the next section. If you're on the podcast, you might just want to fast forward a little bit. You're rolling the dice there, I think, podcasters. But thank you for listening. But so we are headed to spoilers now. You've been warned. The Recycled Boy, Jesse, and your experience running the game. Have at it. What do you think?
So overall, I think I was very, very pleased with it. I don't know exactly what it is about Free League's games, but the starter sets, you do have to do a little bit more prep than you would for other games, I feel. But they set you up for success. But it's also, I don't know, they sort of pepper in the rules where you may need them, but they don't give you too much. Like some of the pain points was the different levels of combat, but there weren't very many instances of combat. Right. Like we said earlier, this is very much a Free League sort of role-playing game. We were sitting around the table pretending like we were kids in the 80s, having fun. But prep for this was interesting. I really like branching storylines. This is one of those. There's you're in a town set in the 80s with these weird technology things happening. You head to the school. You have one clear thing. You wake up in the morning, you're kids, you got to go to school. So you go to school, and then you see that an accident has happened. And that's where the story really kicks off. So you ask around a couple of the adults to see what happened. You get some info, and you get a couple little tidbits on where you could go from there. And it's basically like you're allowed to go anywhere of these 5 places in the town. You could go back home. You could go to the Recycled Boy's house. You could go to the library or whatever. And that was where the heaviest bit of prep was, like making sure I knew all of the situations that I would need to know in case you went there. And it was sort of like, we almost made like all the points the whole way anyway. But eventually, there's a couple branching paths. They go forward like one step, and then everything converges at the end. And, all in all, it only took like 3 hours to run it. But I'd say it took me over the course of a couple days, I think it took me a good 4 or 5 hours of prep, just like reading through, make sure I knew what the character sheets looked like, what kind of roles I would expect to ask them for, like investigation or things like that, and how all that stuff worked. But it still used the Year Zero engine, so it was familiar to the people who had just played Alien enough that it uses the same dice. There's no stress dice, so it was just like rolling. And in this game, there is combat, but you only get like sort of injured. You don't die because you're a kid, and no people die in this.
Well, and the main storyline, right, was that you found out that one of your friends was actually a robot, right?
Yeah, so one of the paths you go is to the actual kid's house. You find out from one of the adults around this like dead body that there was your friend was at the scene of the crime and like ran away. So you're like, okay, let's go check out his house, and they give you some really awesome landscape pictures and artwork that the artist had actually done for this place. And you investigate their house, break in or whatever, and you deal with a bunch of different things. And you learn that the kid is actually a robot, and his parents are scientists. And you have to deal with that sort of revelation that your friend was a robot. So that it didn't like split the party, but it definitely had like an effect. Like you kind of get that weird sort of Ghost in the Shell, Blade Runner like philosophy of like, is a robot a person?
Right.
And that was like fun to explore for like 5 minutes. That was interesting. But then from there, there's like more branching paths, more places you can go.
And you track down your robot friend's parents, and they tell you where they think he might be hiding out, or a couple possible locations, and then eventually you find him, and you're able to help him.
The basic gist is like the robot boy is having some like, he got hit by a car by one of the kids' parents, and you can find that out via rumors in the game. And that caused like damage in his circuits, and now he's going crazy. And so you got to try to figure out how to calm him down, or fix him, or take him out.
But the fun part about this, or the most fun that we had, was really just pretending to be kids in the 80s, right? And we just ran with sort of the John Hughes, like high school tropes that we had. So like, my character was like the, goth poetry writer kid, right? And so I just wrote bad poetry all night long.
Like actually.
And spoke, and like just, so like, I want to share my latest poem with you. And, and there was just like I wrote really terrible rhymes.
Well, we had I think
great
8 or 9 people. We had like a good crew, and there's only I think five pre-generated characters. So we just doubled them.
Yeah.
And like we used a majority of the book and like you said, the map itself can take place in Sweden, or I think it's Arizona.
Yeah. Or Nevada or something. Somewhere in the
So they have in the book and on the character sheets like their Swedish name if you plan to play in Sweden, or their English name.
Right.
So we just used the alternate, sort of forms of them, and some were brothers and sisters and whatever. But you also, because it's in high school, you also have like rivals and best friends and crushes and things like that. So that was really fun to sort of play up.
It was like those motivation cards that you got in the Alien RPG.
Yeah.
But they were on your character sheet, and so you had a rival and you had a crush and all this kind of stuff. And so because you had that, it naturally just fueled the role play.
Yeah.
Right? If you got into character and
like there was a jock that I think was your rival.
Right. And so that was easy, right? Like, I was the nerdy goth kid who writes poetry, and
it's like super unhelpful like at most times, like it's so good. And because we had music going and we had pizza and like snacks, it was such an easy, it was like I said, I think we played for about 3 hours. And it went by like nothing. It was super fun.
Really fun. So at the end of the day, we had a great experience with Tales from the Loop. There's a in terms of next steps, there's this starter set, but if you wanted to move forward, there's a core rule book. There's 2 other than collections of adventures that are out for it. And then there's the Things from the Flood game, which is the 90s teenager version of the game. So this is the 80s kid, Steven Spielberg on bikes experience. And there's also a 90s teenager version, which I think the biggest difference there is your character actually can die, right?
And I think my biggest takeaway, I think, from this, it confirms my my thoughts on Free League and the Year Zero engine and all that I don't really feel like this is a campaign type game. Like the next adventures and the adventure collections are all similar to this, where they're one shots or they're sandboxed.
Right.
So they don't expect you to have a campaign. They expect you to get around and play for a couple hours every so often and have fun with your friends. And I really appreciate them sort of leaning into that and not forcing an adventure, because I don't think a full campaign would do this game justice.
Yeah, if you're looking for a game where you can create and customize a character and have them level up, this is not it.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for a one-shot to play a role-playing game with your friends and you're good with pre-gens, you can't do better than this.
It's super
great.
fun. So I'd love to hear if you have tried any of Free League's games. Mork Borg is a very popular one that we're going to talk about in our next segment. But I've had an enjoyable time playing Tales from the Loop and Alien. We're going to play and try out Things from the Flood and a couple of their other ones. I'm really excited to sort of dive deep into Blade Runner when that comes out.
Oh, yes, definitely.
I'm curious to know if you've played any of their games or have any sort of experience with their Year Zero engine. Let us know in the comments or send us an email at everyeditionrpg@gmail.com. You can also check out any of our socials over at everyeditionrpg.com. It's time to loot the body. On today's Loot the Body, we are talking about Mork Borg, also from Free League.
Yeah, it's a very different game from all the other games that we've been talking about. It does not use the Year Zero engine. Mork Borg, or I think what the Swedish pronunciation is supposed to be Mork Borg. Whatever. You say Mork Borg, I say Mork Borg.
Close enough.
Close enough. But so it is an OSR, an old school Renaissance or revival game that is all about doom and gloom and the end of the world.
Very metal.
Very metal. It's described as a doom metal album of a game. Doom metal is very slow metal. It has its roots in Black Sabbath. Really heavy riffs. Again, with the Black Sabbath thing, usually has regular sung vocals, but they're much about despair.
Right? They're very dark.
Very dark, very depressing. But so this game is an embodiment of that doom metal spirit. And it is a very apocalyptic, mid-apocalypse role-playing game, right? The world is dying, and you are not a hero. You are really just a guy, just an ant, right? trying to survive in a very dark and hopeless world and existence. This is not an uplifting game. This is not a game. Juxtaposing this with Tales from the Loop is really interesting. They're both Swedish, put out by this Swedish company, but they have very different sort of feels when it comes to Sweden, right? Mork Borg, very rules light. The thing that strikes me as interesting about this game, and especially when compared to all the other possible OSR games that you could be playing, one of the things that I think sets Mork Borg apart is it is all player-facing roles.
Yep.
So players are the ones rolling the dice. As the game master in a Mork Borg game, you don't ever really need to roll dice. And so you are rolling to hit a monster, but you're also rolling to dodge a monster's attack. And the thing that's interesting in terms of the game mechanics is they all have the same number to hit, right? So it's 12, right? So if I'm trying to hit a monster, I need to get a 12 or better on a 20-sided die. Easy enough. I might have a plus or a minus here or there, right? But I'm rolling a 20-sided die. I want to get a 12 or better, and I hit the monster. I got my damage for my weapon. If I'm getting attacked, if it's the monster's turn, I'm rolling that same 20-sided die, and I need a 12 or better to dodge, right? Which means, on a 1 to 11, the monster hits me. So if you break down the numbers and the math here, right, the monster actually has an advantage to hit you over you being able to hit the monster.
And that sort of, capitalizes on the doom and gloom.
The brutality.
Yeah. There's a slightly higher chance that you will get hit.
That's right. And this is a game where don't fall in love with your character. Right? This is a game where your character is not necessarily going to survive.
Yeah.
Right. This is not a guarantee. This is not 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. If anything, this might be the antithesis of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Still a fantasy game and still a fascinating read. I know one of the things, Jesse, that you were struck by is obviously its graphic design.
Yeah. Right? So anybody who's been to a metal concert or any form of metal, you can always find their booth with like their T-shirts and their illegible logo, all that. And I don't know, I just for whatever reason was really drawn to this game via the graphic design, and I've definitely found myself more recently, I think especially with the Marvel one, spending a little bit more time and consideration on a game's construction and the look of it.
Yeah.
Like there's another game that you had sort of turned me on to called Grid Shock that was very much just like a sort of graphic design sort of cyberpunky type game.
Yeah,
and that
just
really
beautiful.
drew me into it. So that can really, if you like the sort of dark metal aesthetic or doom metal aesthetic, you'll like this game. There's a lot of really awesome art in it, and it's a very visual game.
Yeah, and there is a thread of tabletop role-playing games right now that really is focused on aesthetics.
Yep.
Right? That really is, producing physical, tangible books and products and pamphlets and adventures and things, it's almost like an art project first, right, and a game second. And I definitely have heard people say that their impression of Mork Borg is that it's an art book first and a game second. That when it comes to the game, it actually can be summarized in one page.
Yeah, so one of the things that I wanted to talk about, how much I appreciate that they have basically like a one-page rule system.
Yep.
Like we had talked about Dungeon Crawl Classics, and where you can have, one character sheet with 4 characters on it for their funnel, and you don't have to flip around for, all their spells and whatnot.
Right.
This has one-page rule sheet, which I think is fantastic.
Yep.
If your rules can be boiled down so they can be easily read on one piece of paper, you're going to have my money any day.
Yeah. Well, and I think there are definitely some people out there that are playing Mork Borg and running it as a campaign.
Yep.
And so they're going beyond just the one page or the one shot or the one night experience. For me, though, I love the rules light nature, and I do tend to think of it as something that would be a fun distraction, but not something I would want to do.
Yeah, I don't know how much time I want to spend in sort of doom and gloom.
Yeah, I think it'd be good for a Halloween game. It'd be good for a one shot. I do like you said, though, I love that it's one page of rules. You could hand that out to everybody, right? And jump in. It couldn't be easier. I just explained the rules. You roll a 12, right? Like that's it, right?
And I've tried before to implement some sort of like dodge mechanic with like smaller groups in 5th edition, and it just always feels clunky and weird. And so I like the ability too that you get to dodge. And as a DM, like I like rolling dice, but if I don't have to have a DM screen, I could just sort of sit back and watch the game unfold and just like sort of steer it in the right direction.
Yeah.
I could really appreciate that.
Yeah. The other thought I had, or final thought here about Mork Borg is, if you're going to run this actually doesn't seem like, while it's rules light, I don't know that it's really first game master friendly. Sure. So I think it relies pretty heavily on you already sort of understanding what role-playing games are and being interested in stripping them down to their basics. So if you don't have that history, if you don't have that background, I'm not convinced that this would make a good first role-playing game. I would say this is definitely for seasoned game masters. That they're gonna be the ones to get the most out of it.
I think first time players could do well.
Yes.
First time DMs or GMs.
Yep.
Definitely not.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And also, just to be clear too, this is definitely not suitable for children. This has very very grotesque imagery. And it's definitely something for more seasoned game masters and also more seasoned minds. So make sure you're not a child if you're playing.
Make sure you're not a child.
If you're playing Mork Borg.
Yeah.
Sorry, kids, you're going to need to wait for this one.
So there's also a pretty healthy third-party scene for Mork Borg.
Yeah, robust. Oh my gosh. There are so many, like most of Kickstarter right now, it seems like tabletop role-playing games is adventures and supplements and pamphlets and hardcover books and records and tapes and anything that you can imagine that's compatible with Mork Borg. They do have a great third-party license. Arguably a blessing or a curse, because the truth is, I think it's getting the name out there, and I think it's growing the game in popularity. But I also think it's impossible to tell what is quality and what is not.
Sure.
So at this point, I would say the only thing that I can clearly recommend is free league stuff.
Sure.
The quality of, and I'm exploring Mork Borg and putting my money where my mouth is and getting a lot of the third-party stuff. I'm not at the point yet where I feel like I could recommend a third-party product just yet, and they really do vary. I've definitely bought some things where I was like, oh, I spent money for this?
Oh, no.
Wah, wah, wah. But I've also gotten some things where I'm like, oh, this is solid. This is quality. So it's probably worth another episode at another time to maybe sift through some of the third-party stuff and really separate the wheat from the chaff and get to the heart of this. There is just a ton of third-party support for this game. No shortage of expansions and additional classes and adventures and magic items and you name it. But definitely varying in quality, so beware.
Thanks for watching our special Free League episode.
Yeah!
We had fun talking about Tales from the Loop. I can't wait to hear about Origins and things from the Flood.
Yeah, looking forward to heading off to Origins in just a couple days now. We might be a little bit silent for the next week while we're at Origins, but check social media, Twitter and Facebook to see if there's any updates on there, and we'll obviously be back and I'll share some stories from Origins from the road.
And if like Jon mentioned a little bit earlier, if you have any recommendations for games that you want to see on our show or want to send us anything, you can always email us at everyeditionrpg@gmail.com. And you can find links to all of our socials over at everyeditionrpg.com. Thanks for watching.
See ya.